Hello and welcome everyone to the Beacon of Light podcast this evening. Sorry, we're a little bit late. We were working with some microphone challenges, but we've got it ready. And Miss Stacey Greene is here with us tonight, and we're really excited to chat with her. But before we start talking to her, we got to jump in to this. I'm April Tribe Juke. Welcome to the Beacon of Light podcast. I believe we are all made with light, and light is hope. This podcast brings authors who write stories of hope to all of you. Your journey to be inspired and amplified by these stories starts now. And we are back. All right. Well, welcome everybody. We're really excited. And as you can see, running on the ticker underneath us is Miss Stacey Greene. And she has written a few books. Awesome. And one that we're going to discuss tonight is called Letters to the Dead Man. So very, very interesting. But before we really start talking about the book, Stacey, why don't you tell us a little bit about yourself?
Okie doke. I am born and raised in the Cleveland area of Ohio. I'm pretty much a homebody. I love gardening. I've been married almost 40 years. I have 3 great children and way too many cats.
Wow, way too many cats. Like more than 2?
Like 7.
Wow, 7 cats. So
And
getting
the
close to
funny,
the crazy cat lady.
yeah, the funny story too is that when we first married, my husband said, "I'm allergic to cats. Please don't bring any cats into the house." And the last 4 cats that we have brought into the house have been ones that he rescued.
he
Yeah,
grew into a little cat heart there.
yeah,
Yeah, it happens. Well,
yeah.
I know exposure over time sometimes can help allergies, so maybe that has helped too.
Yeah. Plus,
Well,
he just
wonderful.
got a big heart. Big heart.
That's awesome. We like big hearts for sure for anyone, right? So,
Yeah.
Stacy, crazy cat lady, loving cat man, 3 great kids. So, tell us why you write and what helped you to become an author.
Well, I always loved to write. I kept a journal since I was in 7th grade, and I probably still have the 7th grade journal on a shelf somewhere in this house. The first book I wrote was not meant to be a book. It was more of a running diary of my feelings and my angst when my husband had an affair. And I ended up kind of writing it like a book, just he said, she said, the pastor said. And I showed it to an editor who said that it was book worthy. So that was the start of my writing career. I know that my husband really wasn't super excited to put it out into the world, but he read it and knew that it would help other couples. So he allowed it to be put out into the world under the pen name Stacey Greene. And I think years later, it was still selling. And I think he really wanted to get other books out there so that that wasn't what I was all about. And one day I came home from work and I had just rapid fire talked to him. And then this happened, and then that happened, and then she said this, and he said that. And my husband looked at me and said, "Get to the point." And I looked really crestfallen and I said, "But that is the point. You're the only man I have left in my life to tell my stories to. My dad died, my brother died, my other brother died, my 2 best friends died, my grandpa died. All of the men in my life have died. You're the only one I get to tell my long, boring stories to." So he looked at me and he said, "There's your next book." So Letters to the Dead Men is written in kind of a narrative nonfiction. And that's why I wrote that.
Wow, incredible. I mean, you just never know what stories are going to lead you to this or
Right.
the other. So we kind of started in the post yesterday and today talking about grief. So you
Mhm.
quickly, rapid fire mentioned all of the men and male figures in your life and in your family's life who have passed on.
Yeah.
So tell us about this idea of grief and how you got through it.
Well, that's the thing. Initially, I really didn't get through it. Um, if you've ever read Personality Plus by Florence Littauer, I'm probably a choleric personality. My mother used to call me a type A personality. We're the kind of people that just steamroll through things. We just keep going. We don't stop to take a breath. And I do remember when my brother passed, I was only 17. And I went right back to work the next day, and everybody looked at me incredulously and said, "What are you doing here?" And I just kind of thought, like, well, what am I supposed to be doing? Am I supposed to just be sitting around crying? And now I know the answer is yes. Wallow in it, experience it. It was a terrible loss and it was a freak accident. And if you read the book, you'll know why I carried so much guilt for years about his death. So every passing, I kind of just steamrolled on to the next activity and the next thing. And it really caught up with me later, especially after the passing of my father. It caught up with me in some strange ways, like anxiety and heart palpitations and things like that. And I realized that each one of those 6 men taught me a different lesson. And I never had the opportunity to either thank them or apologize to them or tell them how I'm doing now, years later after their passing. So writing that book allowed me to grieve by writing letters to them, even though I know I couldn't mail them anywhere. I don't think the postman gets as far as heaven, but I wrote them for my own closure. And I feel that that's one of the best ways to get through grief is journaling and writing and letting yourself wallow in it. Don't ever just brush it off and move on to the next thing. It is a part of life. And 10 out of 10 of us are going to die. So every one of us is going to experience the loss of a loved one.
That's so true. And it's like we all know the elephant in the room. We all
Yeah.
know that's going to happen.
Yeah.
And because of relationships, because of whether that relationship was amazing or terrible,
Yeah.
we connect to one another.
Yeah.
So when there's a loss, there's something that has to be processed.
Yeah.
And the opportunity to process differently is, of course, depending on your
Hmm.
personalities and what you'll do and how you'll start. But if you
Yeah.
don't permit yourself to start, how can you possibly get through anything? It,
Right.
so, how would you feel with so many different things happening within your life? You mentioned your brother was the first to pass. Is that right?
No, it was actually my grandfather. Um, my brother would have been the second or third person out of the 6 I wrote about. But that one, I guess I can do a spoiler alert on that one. Uh, he was a motorcycle rider. And the night before his accident, I saw him at the gas station filling up his motorcycle. And my boyfriend at the time and I were also filling up my boyfriend's car. So I saw he didn't have his helmet on, and I was this close to saying something to him. And I thought, no, he's not going to listen to his baby sister. And so I just let it go. I waved to him, "Hey, Teddy." And we went on our merry little way. And so when the accident occurred, if he was wearing his helmet, the doctor said that all he would have suffered was a scratch on the leg. But because of his head hitting the curb in such a way, he was pretty much not showing any brain activity. And my parents had the absolute agonizing decision to make of pulling the plugs, because after a certain time, if you don't register a brain wave, it's pretty hopeless. And I know that was really tough for them. And like I said, I harbored guilt for that for years, thinking it was my fault, because if I would have told him to put on his helmet, he would have. I know now that's not true. I doubt that he would have, but it's things like that that I had to let go of years later in order to just feel resolved and to let go of the guilt and the hurt as much as I could.
Yeah. So when you faced the paper and the pen, or the computer and the screen,
Right.
what started the writing of that story? Like, did you
Well,
just
what I
start
tried to
words?
do, so there's 6 men, and again, it's kind of written in a narrative nonfiction. So the character's name is Lydia, largely based on me, from the ages of 10 when Grandpa died, all the way to 40 when Dad died. Dad happened to be my best friend. So in order for it to kind of read more like a novel, I had to weave in the relationships that I had with the other people that were passing or that would pass, so that you got a sensation by the end of the book that, oh, so this person taught her about faith, and that person taught her to stop being judgmental, and that other person, she didn't treat him right, she owed him an apology. So as I'm laying out the death of Grandpa, I might have been talking about my relationship with my other brother, Randy, the one that did not die in the motorcycle accident. And also discussing, my relationships in high school, that I was not a girly girl in any way. Most of my friends were guys. And same thing with even the relationship with my parents. I loved my mom. I loved my grandma. But who did I tell my secrets to, or who did I want to hang out with? My dad, my grandpa. It was always the men in my life. So appropriately named Letters to the Dead Men, because that's who I really resonated with. And those are the people that taught me, I think, the most invaluable lessons that I've learned, and that made me who I am.
Wow, it's very, very, very powerful to think, the influence, however it connects, that influence
Right,
is really strong. So Stacy, the concept when you're looking at, putting all of this together,
right.
I know, like, when we start, I'm sure there were probably drafts that came through that had
Hmm.
a lot of, like you shared with one of the story, a lot of guilt. And how do
Hmm.
you make the impact for the reader to feel, but not leave the reader in guilt jail, so to speak, right?
Right,
You gotta bring them
right.
back out. There's hope
Yeah.
at the end.
Well, thankfully, not all 6 of the letters were guilt ridden, and not all 6 of the letters were apologies. Some were, thank you very much. And, look at what I've become because of your lessons you taught me as a child. And thank you, thank you. So I think what I had truly hoped, and it seems like by the book reviews I have that I did achieve that the letters themselves were at the end of each of the chapters of when they passed. So you as the reader would get the idea of, oh, so that's the life lesson that she took from this person. Oh, that's the life lesson she took from the next person. So they're not all guilt ridden. That was definitely my brother Teddy, and then also a little bit my father, just because of the way I had to detach from him when he developed Alzheimer's. It was very hard letting go of my best friend. Very hard.
That is hard. And I'm sure physically you probably were still there, but as the mind goes, it it is a challenge because your heart aches to say, but remember when? But remember, or you could have just started on the inside jokes,
Right.
and that would have been right there. And
Well, and
those
I'm
are those.
yeah, and I'm one of those emotional people who, I kept Teddy's clothing and wore his jean jacket and outfits and things until they no longer smelled like him. I still wear, to this day, I still wear my grandfather's wedding ring. I was so delighted when my grandmother said I could have it. I still keep mementos of all the people in my life as a reminder. Um, but yeah, and now I can look back and say, but they're happy reminders. They're no longer those tragic, sad reminders, because I feel like writing the letters to them and appreciating them and finally being able to grieve by journaling, it's made all the difference in the world to me. I'm so prepared for my own death. Like right now, I have already started thinking about how do I want to be remembered, and what lessons do I still want to give to my family before I go. And it's really made me not afraid to die anymore. It's so freeing.
It is. There is a concept of, I know we hear it kind of as, what is your legacy you'll leave behind? And sometimes we
Right.
get caught up in this, well, I should have all these things done. I really think that that idea of legacy is, what are the stories and how will they know you and how will they remember you? When they
Yeah.
remember Stacy's name, when they
Mm.
remember the family, when they remember, what are the actions, what are the words, what are the fun times, that stuff.
Yeah.
What's really interesting is, like, we just went through a conference just the past 2 days, and
Hmm.
somebody who we were just having a discussion with, and grief came up, and she shared a short story about uh, her son who was killed in an accident,
Hmm.
and it's still pretty fresh. It's less than 2 years, and
Hmm.
just you can kind of march through the story,
Right.
but then the point came where the eyes welled, and
Yeah.
it will continue to grieve, and the grief is meant to sit with us, and we change with time,
Right.
and the grief continues, and the changes that happen, it doesn't fade away and it doesn't lessen. I think we get better at understanding it. I think
Right.
we get better at having
Accepting.
the time and accepting with it.
Yeah.
And I just asked one question. I said, "Could you let me know his name?" So just shared the name. And sometimes, because we don't say the name because their absence, or
Hmm.
because it feels too painful, but now I have a name. And
Yeah.
again, I've never met this person. It was uh, but now I have a tiny piece of the story, and my life can be richer with that, because then I can
Yeah.
remember that as you meet people throughout the day, throughout whatever, we never know their stories, but when you
Right.
get little tiny pieces of it, like a charm bracelet, you get to have
Yeah.
something of a momentum to come back with. So I love how you have these little, pieces of their
Right.
lives for you to remember. And yes, with time, the
Yeah.
the telling again of those stories, or of the time when you and grandpa were doing X, Y, and Z, and
Oh,
laugh and fun, and,
being in the
"Oh, I remember
garden.
the time." Yes,
Yeah.
right, right.
Oh,
And
yeah.
so tell me a little bit about, after he passed, you still continued to garden. So you
Oh,
didn't
yeah.
find that as like, "Nope, we're not doing that
Right.
ever again." So now
Well,
when you plant, what
yeah.
happens?
So yeah, he was probably in his 70s, and they were in this teeny tiny southern Pennsylvania town where I don't think 911 was even installed back in the day. And so if he would have gotten to the hospital sooner, he may have lived. But I didn't garden right away because I was only 10 when he passed, 10 or 11. But years later, when I moved kind of from a suburb of Cleveland out to more of a rural area, that's the first thing I wanted to do. And I know that he's still with me because there are other times besides gardening. There are other times when I'm in church. There are certain hymns, especially How Great Thou Art and Blessed Assurance. I can almost hear him right behind me singing his crackly older man voice, his country accent. And it's just so beautiful knowing that he really taught me how to love God's green earth and how to just make nothing, something from nothing, this little tiny seed that grows into this giant corn stalk or this bountiful garden. And he was very, very quiet. My grandmother was more the matriarch and the ruler of the house, or the head of the house. If you've ever watched that movie, Babe, about the little pig that was trained to be a sheepdog, my grandpa kind of reminded me of him, just very quiet, but he knew he loved the Lord and he loved the earth, and he just, oh, he was the best. And it was very devastating for me as a 10-year-old, because I was, of course, young in my faith and thinking like, well, wait a minute, I have 4 grandparents. God, why did you take away my favorite? It was hard. It was very, very hard. So, yeah, I love my garden. Last year, I produced 420 tomatoes. That's a lot.
Wow, that is a lot. I'm looking at my preserves over here. I'm like, that's a lot.
It's a lot.
That's awesome. That's awesome. Yeah. If you have any tips for me,
Yeah.
I, I'm more the canner. I'll preserve whatever.
Oh, right,
I'm I'm getting better. I know that it's a skill I can keep improving on. I'm improving
right.
on my gardening. My grandmother and my grandfather, very similar, just everything they touched. And my grandfather grew roses. And
Oh,
my 8th daughter was to be born on his birthday, which was May the 4th, but instead she
oh,
came 6 days earlier on my birthday on April 28th. Okay.
nice,
So I
nice.
needed to get that Rose in there somehow, so
Right.
gave her my first name, and then
Yeah,
Rose is that middle name,
that's
because
smart.
I wanted to have grandpa's just name somehow, or remembrance,
Yeah.
and, kinda tough with a guy's name like Howard. Howardette, like, like, I'm not sure how this is gonna work. So,
Yeah.
I'm like, "Well, what did he always love?" And he loved the
Right,
garden, and he always had a rose, a small little baby bud rose in his
right.
lapel when the roses were blooming,
Sure.
and at church, every Sunday, he had that, and he was a quiet man and had a lot of history that was very traumatic, and so that garden was his outlet.
Right.
When you learn and grow up and learn more about what the trauma was and the
Mhm.
appreciation even more. And what's
Right.
so fun is now that we've moved to a new home, this home has 3 beautiful rose bushes.
Can I ask what color the roses are?
Oh, there are a whole variety of colors. It's one blooms open with an orange, pink, and a white.
Oh,
It's just beautiful, and again, I'm
yeah.
such a novice. I'm like, "I don't know what any of these things are called." One is
Right.
very, very fuchsia pink, and then there's this white that is just
We
gorgeous.
we have some
So
coral roses that I just think that's the
oh,
prettiest color.
yeah,
Yeah.
and they smell beautiful. Anyway, we're going everywhere here, but that's the idea, right?
Right.
That's part of the grief, is to remember and go through,
Right.
not to feel loss only. Loss is a part,
Right.
and that and with loss and storytelling, you start to find that spark again, right?
Yeah.
So, okay, you have grandpa, your brother,
Yep.
your
Yeah.
dad. Who are the other gentlemen?
So there were 2 other people. Again, in high school, I didn't hang out with the girls doing their makeup in the bathrooms. I hung out with the guys. And the one gentleman, he was in school as a 19-year-old, and I was probably only 14 in ninth grade when he was in 12th grade. And I wondered why he was so old in high school. And it was because he had to repeat grades because he had a rare blood condition. And he kind of bragged about being in 2 medical journals. His condition was so rare, but eventually he lost his life at 19. And, right before then, he had been struggling with faith. And he had actually been, he went to a church because he wanted to find something. He knew he was terminal. And this particular church, I don't know where he went, but they almost laughed at him for whatever kind of Bible he brought, like that's not the right kind of Bible. And he was so put off by that. And he was so in need of something. And he did, in fact, find it with the Mormon faith. And he, to me, was saved before his passing. But uh, I won't tell you the lesson I learned from him, because I do want people to read, what did I learn from Charlie? But he actually passed, I think, either right before or right after my brother Teddy. Teddy died after I was out of high school. And then the other person that was not a relative was a Jewish boy named, well, in the book, named Aaron. I want to make sure I protect his name, because I made sure that everybody else, their parents or living relatives, gave me permission to use their name. And he was very different. Uh, he was actually, I guess, what I would call alternative lifestyle. But he was funny, and we got along so well when he wasn't being mean to me. We kind of had these up and down, very strange relationship. But he passed away of AIDS when he was only in his 20s. And that was really hard on me, because I knew he led a very promiscuous lifestyle, but he was still a child of God. Um, we're all persons of worth. And so that was the other non relative.
That's a beautiful way to state it, because we are. We're
Right.
all brothers and sisters. And if we
Yeah.
could just see that for a moment, the idea of power, the idea of want, the idea of all this stuff melts
Yeah.
out, and we level our own playing field,
Yeah.
and we see each other and wonder, what can we do to help or to serve you,
Right.
or to, just laugh
Or to
together.
be, yeah. Yeah, it's very true. And my dad was the last person I wrote about, and he was the one that always knew what to say, no matter what situation I was in. I'll tell you a story that didn't have anything to do with the death, but when I was a little girl, my parents started their own business. And at the time, there was no such thing as all day kindergarten. And they needed me out of the house so they could do their business. And so they found a Montessori school that would take 5-year-olds in first grade, but it was run out of a synagogue. And so my dad was trying to explain to this little 5-year-old girl about being Jewish. And I was nervous, and it wasn't anything I knew anything about. And I just was kind of scared. And he knew just what to say. He said, "Oh my goodness, you're so lucky. You're going to know so much more than your brothers and sister about the Old Testament, because did you know the Jewish Torah is our Old Testament? And you know what I heard? I heard that you're going to get to celebrate all sorts of different holidays than we celebrate here. You're going to get to celebrate Purim and Passover and Hanukkah, and because this particular Montessori school, the deal was, if it was run through the synagogue insisted that we learn Hebrew and that we celebrate the Jewish holidays. So we had Hanukkah break instead of Christmas break. And I just thought, wow, he got me through that. And I loved that school. And I am 59 years old, and I can still correctly say the blessing over the bread and the blessing over the wine in Hebrew. So, my dad was perfect at knowing what to say in every situation that I was ever in, always
That
looking for the best.
that's
Yeah.
beautiful, and the awakening and opening to be exposed of, they're wrong, we're right.
Right.
Uh-uh.
Yeah.
It's like,
Yeah.
let's go learn more about that.
Right.
Okay. I
Right.
mean, incredible. And that, gosh, you just reminded me of my Jewish uncle.
Oh, really? I know.
one at one Sunday dinner, we had asked, "Well, Uncle George, would you care to offer the blessing?" And
Right.
he says, "I know one." And he gave the blessing over the bread, and
Right.
I just was like, "Hey, tell me more." Like, it was just
Yeah.
so
Yeah.
was so amazing, and just to feel a sense of reverence and
Right.
just love, and I will never forget that. Now, I can never say it one word. You sure can. I could It was just so impactful, and he
Yeah.
had this feeling of just like, I'm okay here. We're like, of course, we loved Uncle
Right,
George. He was the best.
right.
He
Yeah.
always had the best stories.
And
Like
no
the
matter
pet.
what and no matter what we believe, I honestly I have so many friends of different faiths and different backgrounds, and I every now and then I do a little judging, and I just keep reminding myself, step out of judgment, because I don't care what you believe. I care that you know why you believe what you believe. And that was something I think my dad always instilled in me, especially when, like I said, my friend that had the blood disease, he was struggling that the church was kind of, poo pooing him. And so he found the Mormon faith. And then my brother was teasing me about that. Like, oh, the elders are going to come talk to us now. And he made jokes and all of this. And my dad just shut him down right away. And, my brother was saying, oh, but, it's preposterous what they believe that there was some weird things found in a cave in North America. And my dad said, is it any more preposterous than Jonah being in the belly of a whale for 3 days? He just, my dad was so great. He just always knew how to just shut it down. Same thing with the passing of my brother, Teddy. He saw that I was not grieving. He absolutely saw that I was just in a funk. And he sat me down one day, several months after his passing, and said, we're going to find some good things that happened out of Teddy's death. And I said, are you crazy? He was 26. He had his whole life ahead of him. And he said, oh, but isn't that nice? He didn't have a wife or children that he had to leave. I said, he just stopped smoking. He just started running. Yes. And isn't that great that he was able to donate his lungs and eyes? And, he probably saved 7 to 10 people with his being a donor. And I said, but he was just going back to college. He never finished college. And my dad said, oh, he was so smart, college or no college. That, Teddy could fix anything or do anything he put his mind to. And so no matter how many tennis balls of anger I lobbed over at my dad, he would just lob one back with the reason that it's okay. He's with God. We miss him. We will always miss him. He even kind of teased and said, well, God must have really needed something fixed up in heaven because, Teddy was the fix-it man in our family. So lessons learned, so many lessons.
Beautifully said. And
Yeah,
in the reminiscing of all of that, we hope that this has helped many of you who might be in a grieving process. No matter where you are within that journey, we will all find ourselves there one day. So hopefully you will pick up this book, get some great information about stories and connections and the lessons learned, and maybe put those things down within yourself with friends, family, people who have passed in your own life so that you can remember what are those lessons, what is the impact, and remember that your life is richer for it. Thank you so much, Stacey, for being a
thank
part of
you.
the podcast this evening, and we hope this has helped. And just remember that we are all here together to shine that light, even if it starts as a pinpoint, as it becomes brighter with the hope and faith that we can carry one to another. Let's be that for each other. Thank you, everybody,
Absolutely.
and we'll see you next week.